Welcome back to another episode of the Brew podcast. I'm your host, Mr. Cool Beans here, and it's Thursday, February 20th, and forgive me if my voice sounds a little bit groggy. I am kind of coming over a cold a little bit, but I'm still rocking. I'm still cracking with it. And also, I'm so glad that you guys decided to tune into another episode chronicling my CKD journey. If this is your first time joining me here on my platform, just want you to know that the purpose of this podcast is to bring advocacy and awareness to chronic illnesses, more specifically for me, chronic kidney disease. In addition, I do talk about all of the importance of mental and men's health and the journey through my various diagnoses. I just want you all to know that I hope that by the end of every episode, you are able, or you should be able, to walk away with a golden nugget from my journey to help you navigate your own. Remember, no journey will ever look the same, but we can always learn from one another to move forward in this life. As always, this episode is sponsored by you guys, the listeners. Every stream, every download, every share helps this podcast go just a little bit further. Once again, we're building a community, and I just want to thank you all for tuning in one time more and one time less. Before we begin, I just want to take care of some housekeeping matters here. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not medical advice, okay? Anything that seems medically sound is strictly from my experience as I navigate CKD and is not a substitute for seeing a medical health professional. Please consult your doctors if you have any health concerns or questions, as I am not a medical profession. I am just a CKD patient sharing my world with you guys. All right, this episode 3, I think I'm going to split this into two parts here. We're going to have the A side and the B side. This is the A side, and we're going to talk about the mental health part of CKD, which is super important. I do feel like this side of it is kind of overlooked a lot in the terms of health, because many times when we think of health, we think of our physique, we think of our heart, we think of our organs, we think of all the other stuff that kind of makes us move, makes us function. But the main thing that does helps us function the most is our minds. You know, our minds is super critical to our daily activities, and that can be overlooked. But let's do a quick recap. Episode one of my podcast, I gave you guys the full synopsis, the full breakdown of how I even got to making podcasts, how my journey started, what happened all up in between, from the pneumonia episodes to the high blood pressure fist fights, even to the first diagnosis and how I found out. And so if you want to check that out, that's all back in episode 1. You can go ahead and stream that one as well. Episode 2, I kind of jumped right into the whole clash of CKD coming from the high blood pressure episode, and what is regular high blood pressure versus malignant hypertension, even what is hypertension in and of itself, and how I came to CKD through the means of high blood pressure. Not that it's a good thing, you know, nobody ever wants CKD, but all of that happened with my, fist fights with high blood pressure. So episode 1 and 2 is still up. You can always go back and check those out. And the biggest thing too, when it comes to high blood pressure, I just want to chime in on that because, as I mentioned in episode 2, high blood pressure was something that I really did struggle with. And I think it affected me in many ways because I was always conscious or subconscious about what my blood pressure looked like, to the point where it kind of prohibited me from wanting to go to the doctors. Because you know why? When you go to the doctors and you struggle with high blood pressure, that's always going to be the topic of conversation. You might go in for you might go in for a cold. Yeah, you got to stuff your nose or something like that. And, next thing you know, your blood pressure's high. That's a bit concerning. And when you hear that, you don't really want to hear about your blood pressure because you only came here for one thing, but then your one thing becomes something else. And then that also kind of makes it critical for your mental health, I would say, because it adds on that extra stressor that you got to worry about. Man, my blood pressure is high. Oh my gosh, what are the numbers? What is the doctor going to say? Am I going to be judged? And another thing too is when you have high blood pressure and you sit in that doctor's office, first thing they're going to think, one of the things that you feel like they're looking at you as is like, oh, your blood pressure is high, so you must be eating too much salt. And for me, I knew for a long time I had given up a lot of salty food. I'm doing the DASH diet and everything. I no longer ate salt at that point, or salty food at that point. And it was always the topic of conversation. You need to use more herbs, stop using the table salt. But I'm thinking to myself like, man, you guys don't know me. You guys don't go home with me. You guys don't know what I'm putting on my plate for you to assume that I'm eating salty food or greasy food that's contributing to this high blood pressure that I just so happen to have. And so you go back home and you feel a little subconscious. And in that subconsciousness, you start thinking negatively about yourself. And you know, yes, it can be a critique of sorts. Maybe it's something that you need to reflect on, and maybe, hey, you are eating salty food. Maybe you need to step back. But what happens when you're not eating those things, when you're not consuming a whole bunch of fast food, and now you're going back feeling like the world is judging you based off some numbers off a BP monitor? So that in and of itself can almost train wreck you as far as how you think about yourself and your mental health. So this is why it is crucial to address this aspect of CKD, because even with CKD, there are some stigmas. There are some stigmas that come with it. You know, if your kidneys are messed up, oh man, look, it must be because you drink too much alcohol. Kind of, sort of, but it could also be attributed to liver if that's the case. But we're not going to go there because we're focusing strictly on my situation. And then we can always chime in later on in the comment section on how CKD can bring stigmas to you or make you feel judged because you have the diagnosis of CKD. Like I was saying, CKD does carry a lot of stigmas. A lot of times people say, well, it's because, you know, you eat a lot of protein. And yes, overconsumption or too much levels of high protein can actually cause some stress on the kidney levels. I don't know to what degree it can train wreck your kidneys to the point where you're at automatically stage 4. But I'm assuming that if your kidneys can't process all that protein, it will struggle a lot and can cause some damage to it. And if continued further on. You know, that subconscious is real, you know, and a lot of times people get tagged with certain scenarios based on their diagnosis, and sometimes that's not even the case. So with this episode, you guys, I'm going to try to be very empathetic. I'm going to try to be very honest and open on how my mental health has been impacted as far as my CKD diagnosis, and how everything as far as the high blood pressure and how, you know, my health journey has kind of come to this culminating effect on my mental health, because it is real. I think mental health is the scariest because it's the most silent and sometimes one of the most unseen, you know, issues as far as health is concerned. Some people have a great way of wearing their emotions on their sleeves, and that's great because they can receive the help all the more. But what happens to the person who struggles in those areas, but they still keep a smile on their face or don't like to talk much because they feel like they're misunderstood? You know, so I'm going to try my best to be as open as possible. I mean, a lot of things I would love to share, but I think a lot of things I'm still kind of processing as well. But let's kind of jump right into it. So I'm going to kind of recap to this part here. Some of my initial reactions to my diagnosis was not that great. And, you know, I have received a lot of diagnoses within the past, I don't even know, 10 years, I would say. You know, of course, there's high blood pressure. Of course, there was reoccurrence of pneumonia. I've also had the whole enlarged heart thing. I also had, you know, CKD's been a thing as well. Haven't had diabetes or anything like that. However, though, the ones that I did have, the big diagnoses that I did get on my medical charts, did impact how I think about myself. Becoming very subconscious, because when you think of enlarged heart due to stress and the high blood pressure, and again, high blood pressure has been the culprit the whole time. And so, like I mentioned, going to the doctors has been really critical for me, because every time I go, it's always going to be, I'm in there more so for my blood pressure than the actual symptom that I'm actually facing. But again, my whole experience with CKD didn't just start at my diagnosis. I think my experience with CKD happened from when I was a kid. I remember growing up in Miami, my parents always brought me over to their friend's house to kind of, you know, if they needed to go out, if they needed to go to work, I would get dropped off, you know, and they would watch me for a couple hours, and my mom or dad would come pick me up later on. I remember, and I'm not going to call any names or mention any names, and not like you guys are going to research who it is, but I remember the family that I stayed with, the husband, I believe he had CKD. He definitely had CKD, because that was the first time that I ever heard the word dialysis. And when I heard dialysis, what came with that, without knowing the full picture, I just know I heard this person had dialysis, and whatever food they dished out didn't taste good because it didn't have salt. All right. If you ever tasted unsalty food for the first time, you're wondering, whoa, where's the flavor in this food? And so that was the first time I really tasted unsalted food. And it was strange to me because I'm like, wait, this is not how you cook. Why are they cooking so different? And I remember hearing dialysis, and for a while I hadn't seen the husband of the house. And the wife, she would tend to me. I would hang out with her kids and stuff like that. And I just knew that there was a change going on within their family dynamic. And so years kind of went by, and then I got the word that the husband ended up passing away. And that shook me because, okay, I'm like, wait, how did he die? He didn't get in a car accident. He didn't die from any crazy, calamity, no lightning struck him or whatever, but I heard that he was going through dialysis. And so that word dialysis kind of stuck with me even from a little kid. And I knew what kind of came with that. It was weird. Dialysis came with weirdness and weird tasting food, super unsalty food. And so as I grew up, I started learning about high blood pressure and how high blood pressure can impact your kidneys. It can impact, your heart and all of that stuff. And so I remember one time going to the doctor, and he mentioned to me, hey, man, you might want to manage or monitor your blood pressure because, it can really affect your kidneys. If you go to the dialysis center, you'll look and you'll see there are a lot of African-American males that are there, on dialysis. And so that's when I really made the connection between high blood pressure and dialysis, which tied back to that event when I was a kid watching another man go through it or watch his family go through him going through dialysis. Man, that was a tongue twister. So that was my initial emotional reaction, was not a great one because, like I said in episode 2, I remember hearing that prognosis, and when I heard that I had CKD stage 4 and I looked in my wife's eyes, I immediately turned to my wife's eyes, and her eyes looked like, I can't describe it. It was almost as if she heard that it's over. And that crushed me. Because I've battled with pneumonia. I've battled with that enlarged heart situation. I've had so many scenarios where I've caught mega fevers and had to go to the ER. But this time around, this was something that I couldn't shake as easy. And you know what's funny? Well, actually, it's not so much so funny as it is sad. I try my best to keep myself encouraged. Whenever I hear a crazy news about myself, I'd be in a hospital ER and, the nurses will be laughing, or the doctor will come in and I'll have a joke and we'd be talking or we'd be sharing stories and stuff like that. And what's crazy is while these great times are happening in the emergency room or in my actual room when I'm admitted, what's sad is I'm laughing and smiling, but deep down, I'm really worried. I'm really concerned. I remember when I had COVID pneumonia, I was sitting in a hospital room because there was nowhere else I could go. I could get up and walk around after a while because I had to be bedridden. They told me to get up and start moving. But I do remember standing outside of the window watching cars go by or people leaving the hospital to go home for the first time. And I'm wondering, am I ever going to do that too? So in those moments where I'm like trying to laugh it up, trying to be positive, trying to be Mr. Cool Vibes, there are a lot of times where I'm really scared. A lot of times where I was just really nervous and terrified and didn't know if I was going to make it out alive, because I don't know, because it's always the unknown with the hospital. Yeah. So that initial, knee-jerk reaction to hearing my diagnosis kind of tied back all the way back to when I was a kid and I heard the first word dialysis before, because it was brought up. When you had CKD stage 4 and your GFR is really low, you might be going into dialysis. And I'll be honest with you, I was terrified because in my mind, I equated the word dialysis to dying, and rightfully so, because I was a kid and didn't understand. But you can possibly have some adverse effects that can lead to death with kidney disease if you don't jump into some kind of intervention like a kidney transplant or dialysis. And so all of those things came to my mind, and I really kind of crashed a little bit. So with that, I would have to say there has been moments where there has been a lot of anxiety, fear, or even depression. A lot of that, especially when, well, first we can start off with the hospital room. I remember being in the hospital room so many times, like for 2 weeks straight, just being in there and being pricked and, having blood drawn and having tests being made every single day. Anxiety came in because It was almost as if I was looking into my new reality, being in a hospital. It wasn't fun because at some point, you got tired of being, having blood drawn. Your veins wasn't giving enough or yielding enough blood. So you had to make sure you drink water. There was so much more that was required of you in those moments. You were afraid because every single time the report came back, from different tests, they noticed something's wrong with your blood levels now. Your blood levels are dropping, or your iron is dropping, or your GFR is taking a tank. So you start getting scared because you don't know, well, am I even going to wake up to see tomorrow? Yes, this is real. This is coming from me. For those of you who know me, the Mr. Positive person, the person who likes to crack jokes, the person who's of good, I get scared because I'm human. Right? And these are the dark sides that people don't really like to talk about because sometimes they don't have the space to talk about it. They feel like they're going to be judged, or they should, you know what, what's crazy? I think a lot of times too, it's just not having the right person to discuss things with, because you might be going through something crazy. You might be going through the worst time of your life, but as soon as you start sharing, people tend to turn their antennas off because they just don't want to hear that. They just want to hear all good things, even if it's not about them, or even if it's not something super important. As long as it's good, it's fine. Nobody wants to really tune in and hear you out. And I'm a big critiquer of folks who ask, hey, how you doing? I'm like, in my mind, I'm thinking, do you really want to know how I'm doing, or you just asking that because that's just the format for greeting? Even if they say, hey, how you doing? And I say something like, the kitchen caught on fire. They'll be like, oh, that's cool. It's almost like their question of how you're doing. They don't expect to hear the actual response that you want to share. They're just ready to reply, okay, that's great. Oh, that's cool. And they go move on to the next thing. I've experienced that so many times. But I just say all of that to say that the anxiety, fear, and fear and depression, all of those kind of came in a great bundle package for me. And there was no real way to express it other than, just trying to smile and laugh through it, hoping that everything would work out for the better. Me and depression. And depression has so many, and I'm not saying that, having a quick moment of depression or fear or anxiety is going to cause all these crazy health issues. But when you have a steadily flow of depression or anxiety or fear over a long period of time, it can do a lot of things. For example, it can weaken your immune system. I came to realize that stress and depression and anxiety, they can weaken your immune system. I remember there was a long period of time where I would get really sick. Why? Because I was super stressed out. I remember being a classroom teacher and just being in there within a stressful environment, highly stressful. You come home, there's more stress there, not because of my wife or anything like that, but just because there's so much to maintain as an adult. And then you jump right back in to take care of 40 kids every single day for a whole school year. You kind of get burnt out and stressed out. And I would notice how my immune system would get super weakened to the point where I would get sick often. Matter of fact, I would burn through my sick days like nobody's business. Within the first part of the school year, I would burn through my sick days because I would be so stressed out. And I didn't realize that with all stress, high levels of stress can increase your blood pressure, which can lead into other things going wrong with your body. And you know what? It's all about that work-life balance. I feel like I didn't have that as much. Man, God only knows. I wish I would have paid more attention to my, I guess, mental health or my emotional health or just my just health in general. I think I could have done myself a better service if I would just pay more attention to how my stress levels were and my depression levels were and just kind of address them appropriately before I added it onto all the other things that I already had going on, which brought me to this point. I will say also that CKD has affected my self-esteem when it comes to areas of my relationships or even my work life. Like, for example, right now, I would even say for the better half of a year now, I've been on medical leave. I've been on medical leave because, and let me just break it down, it's not that I just stopped working, okay? I've been on medical leave simply because with the amount of surgeries and procedures and doctor's visits that I have to do now, I mean, we're talking about every month there's at least one or two hospital or doctor visits. with the amount of visits that I had to do, it almost wouldn't make sense for me to just jump right back in because I would be requesting time off left and right, left and right, left and right. I know that when I first went to see my nephrologist, one of the things was to see if I can do flexible working schedules, with, hours, adjusting my hours, seeing if I could work in another department or anything like that. However, though, got to keep in mind, I was a classroom teacher. There is no flexible scheduling when you're a classroom teacher. It's 8 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. That is it. You're on between those times. And I'll be honest, it crushed me because I had to realize that my health was important, even though that I knew that I was going to take a loss financially, but my health was not going to be replaced if I just went to work and just crashed on myself if I did that. So no flexible schedule. So that kind of killed my self-esteem as far as that. And me being a man, and I know this is going to, honk the horn and all the whistleblowers are going to come after me, but me being a husband, and this is where I'm going to be super vulnerable here. Me being a husband, me being a father, there's so many things I do and so many roles that I play and I contribute in the areas of finance. I like to feel like I'm holding it down a lot, and this is where my masculinity, and I shouldn't even be bringing this up because I know I'm gonna get torn up for this, but it's just truth because it's real to me. Being the husband, being the father in the household, I like to feel that my contribution is the majority. I pride myself in coming home and bringing the quote unquote bacon. The proverbial bacon, like why bacon? Why not come home and bring the cucumbers or I don't know, something else. But anywho, when that kind of stopped for me, that work life piece, and it is temporary. I'm just hoping that my primary care can bring me back into the workforce or gives me the approval for it. But when that kind of stopped, I did kind of feel subconscious. I felt like I was being lazy. I felt like I was being a bum, for lack of a better word. I felt like because I wasn't contributing a whole bunch of money financially, I felt like my manhood almost had no meaning, or it was tied to how much money I was bringing. And my wife had to quickly make me realize, like, hey, look, that's not what it is. While that's important, I shouldn't tie my financial ability to my masculinity as a man, because there's so many other things that I do in a household that brings value. Like I make sure I'm raising my son. I'm making sure the house is taken care of. If something breaks, I can fix it still. I'm not just kind of laying around just watching TV all day drinking, soup and, I can't even drink soda. But you know what I mean? Like it hit me so hard. And even now, I can be honest, like I had to find something to do because just waiting around for doctor's appointments and these surgeries, and they come by the many. I'm not even gonna lie. The in-between times are kind of short. It's like one week I'm here, one week I'm back at the oncologist or wherever I am. So I had to find something to do in between, even if it's not working. I had to start something. This is how I kind of had the brainchild of starting this podcast, I would say. But anywho, my work life got impacted. And so that impacted my self-esteem as a man. Even in my relationships, there are times where, I kind of look at myself and, I realized quick that I am not the same person that I was before. I think I'm very careful. And so even with the chronic illness of CKD, I tend to kind of self-wallow or get into a depressional mode that takes me away from my relationships. It really takes me away from the things that I really love to enjoy. Like if I want to go out, sometimes I'll be like, I don't feel like it. And it's not just because I'm tired, but it's because I enter what's called a funk. I get into a deep funk because I'm thinking about all the things that could go wrong. And a lot of times I need to be there. And I remember having a conversation with my nurse practitioner and my oncologist. And she was telling me her story, how, there are times where she just don't want to. And I'll be honest, for those of you struggling with any chronic illness, you have those moments where you just don't want to. And I just remember like she was talking, and I was just like nodding my head, like, yeah, man, you got it. Yeah, that's right. And she said she doesn't want to show up. She doesn't want to, get out of bed some days because she's either fatigued or she's just not feeling it that day. But you have to still show up regardless. And so it's mustering enough courage, mustering enough grit to get up and show up, not just for you, but for the person who, your spouse, for your friends, for your family members. You got to show up for them. I mean, yeah, there are going to be times where you just can't because your energy won't allow you to. But I think a lot of times we have the tendency to want to just close off in our shells and wallow in the dark places because of what we're going through. And nobody else seems to understand it because only we can walk in our shoes. We can share it, but to walk in our shoes is completely different. So I had to make sure that my relationships didn't struggle because I wanted to be selfish and withdraw myself. But then that's when you almost kind of need people to kind of come around you and support you in that sense and kind of check in on you and make sure you're good, and make you laugh and do things that kind of lifts you up a bit. And I felt like because I wasn't running off of my own battery enough, I felt down about myself. I felt like, man, like, look what I've become. Like, this is not me, and no, it's not because, I stopped shaving my face and I grew a whole beard and, now I'm just looking like, Moses and I got a whole Leonidas on my face that I'm in depression. No, it's not that. I think a lot of times too, the self-esteem is something that you don't see. There's a powerful quote. And speaking of friends and lifting you up, I remember there was a quote that I read that said something like, true friends are the ones who see the pain in your eyes while everybody else believes the smile on your face. That was so powerful for me because so many times I would be laughing and smiling and cracking jokes, but then deep down inside, if you really had eyes to look inside of minds, you would see that I'm not doing well sometimes. And that's okay because I do have people who are around who can see that and just make sure I'm good. And in return, when I come out, I show up for them, So yes, CKD has definitely impacted my self-esteem, whether it's in my relationships or in my work life. And even if I do pivot, because quite frankly, I remember my doctor telling me like, hey, look, man, with your stress levels and stuff like that, dude, I don't think teaching is in your future for work again, because you, with your kidney function and everything going on right now, to go back into that stressful environment, it'll impact me severely. And so even if I do pivot, whatever comes next, I'll be glad to jump back into that to be who I need to be for my family and my wife. Yeah, that was a lot. I don't think that's things I've ever shared before. Like, I hate the fact that, the struggle in silence or suffer in silence thing, it's not cool. Because we're humans. We need to share. We need to talk to people. And every single time that we shut down and we have nobody to talk to, certain severe damages happen. I can't even go into the amount of times where you would hear a story where somebody would just always smiled a lot but never had somebody to talk to. Then the next day you hear something happen to that person by their own hand. I think that is a real phenomenon that we kind of diminish or undermine so much. And I'm not saying, we need to make a case for everybody who's stressed out or anything like that. They're going to do something like that. But if we see certain red flags, if we see certain, levels that are heightened because they're going through certain crises, we might need to, check in with them a little bit more. Like I think of Robin Williams. Robin Williams, he was a funny guy. He was a cool, character to, cool actor to play any kind of crazy role, from Flubber to Hook to, Mrs. Doubtfire, if you will. But then the guy who made us laugh is the same guy who ended up, croaking or ending it all for himself. So sometimes the mental health part is super pivotal. And I don't think he had a chronic illness or anything like that. Maybe the chronic illness was mental. Maybe it wasn't something in his DNA or in his blood. It could have been all in his mind. And this is not to say that everybody needs to now look at themselves and say, hey, I think I might have some kind of, no. We're not doing that. However, though, there are folks who are going through certain calamities that do impact them in certain ways, that we might not understand. And we don't know if, because of their situation, they may be more at risk for certain things, and they just might need somebody to talk to. And I think coping mechanisms are even super more important. I think for me, some of my coping mechanisms that's been super helpful was, just open communication with my nephrologist, my doctor. Shout out to Dr. Hayes. My coping mechanism with him, there are times where I do certain labs. I'll shoot him a text message. He'll ask me, what are some other things that, how am I feeling? He'll check in on me. And that's good too, because it kind of helps me feel like I'm not the only one being super vigilant as far as my situation is concerned. I have my doctor on my side, even support from my case manager and my nurse at my insurance company. I do have Better insurance. I just found out that it's a Medicaid insurance. I didn't know that. I was at Blue Cross Blue Shield, not to bring up insurances or anything like that, but I think what I appreciate about Better is because with all my situation and they know about my chronic kidney disease, they call me and check in on me. I'm not calling slack on Blue Cross Blue Shield, but they reach out to me to check and see how I'm doing. I even have, my case manager. He sends me resources and stuff like that. And I think that is great because it's beyond just having family members checking in on me. It's also professionals in the healthcare field who are looking out after me. And did I even mention the folks at Tampa General? Matter of fact, I got a call this morning from the cancer center at Tampa General calling me about my pathology report and just kind of going over the test results with me for my genetics. I'll talk about that later. But, it's just so good to have a strong team, not just family, but medical professionally around you to kind of comfort you as well. And another coping mechanism that I have to kind of cope with what I'm going through is needing an outlet. I find that chronicling my CKD has been super helpful because I feel like I'm going through something and I'm also sharing it, and I know that it might be impacting somebody else who might be suffering with it in silence. Even whether it's CKD or not, it could be any other form of chronic illness. The fact that I'm sharing things from a chronic illness perspective, I know that it's going to help somebody else later on, and then I'll even get some secret DMs that say, hey man, I thank you so much for sharing that. Or even in the comment sections underneath a post or a reel, they'll come back and tell me, hey man, you're doing a good job. I appreciate you sharing that because this is so unspoken of. And it makes me feel good that I'm using my circumstances to enrich or empower somebody else who's going through something as well. So, that's just a few of the coping mechanisms that I have. Of course, there's the other things that I do, but that's all a part of my, just balancing and self-care and keeping my mind at peace a little bit. But a lot of the coping mechanisms, and, maybe these are not coping mechanisms, just things that I use to kind of keep myself at bay and relax. Or maybe they are. I'm still learning along the way. So if I'm getting it all wrong, if I don't have the medical terms properly, exactamundo, please don't beat me over the head. I'm still a CKD patient, just learning as I'm going along. This is only year 1, okay? But also I will say this though. There are a lot of practical tips and strategies for managing your mental health and the emotional aspects of CKD. All right. There's a lot of them. My wife, she is a mental health specialist. She works at Lake County Public Schools, and she sees a lot of families. She does a lot of testing with kids, and she talks to a lot of parents. She talks to a lot of kids. So she's a pro. I would call her a pro. I don't walk around with a master's in social work or mental health. I don't have that, but she rocks that, and she does it so gracefully. She's shared with me so many tips and resources, even in the most loving way. Like, babe, you gotta take care of yourself. No, you're gonna rest. You're gonna sit down and go to sleep, or you're doing too much, and all that stuff. But on the professional side of things, man, you know what? I probably should have her come on here and we can dish it out. We can talk about it even more, and you guys get to meet her too. But anywho, there are some really great strategies for managing the emotional aspects of your CKD. One of which is mindfulness and meditation techniques. I know a lot of times, being mindful, a lot of that we sometimes don't know what that means. I'll be honest with you. When I heard somebody tell me, you have to do mindful and meditation techniques, I'm thinking to myself, like, I'm being mindful of my situation. Meditation? What do you want me to sit cross-legged and just go hum all day? Like, no, that's not meditation. Or not necessarily meditation, rather. I think mindfulness is just kind of grounding yourself. Realizing that, okay, if I am here now and I'm breathing, that's something to give thanks for. If I am still able to get up and stand up and walk to the fridge to grab a cup of water to drink, that's something to be thankful for. And I'm mindful of that. If I still have so many things around me, like I have a roof over my head, or I still have, a car or gas in the tank to drive, and, like I still have the means to do certain things, that's something to be mindful and thankful of. And even meditating, like me, for example, I like to meditate, on God's word, me being a Christian and all. I'll be thankful and remember that, things are being provided for, not just because of my hands, because right now my hands aren't bringing much in right now, but I'm still being provided for. And I can only give thanks to God for that, because, matter of fact, just being able to get out of the hospital is something to give God thanks for. And so I think a lot of that has to do with the meditation, or just thinking positive thoughts, thinking about how, even though you're in the circumstance, your body is still functioning. Like, I know my GFR is around 24, 25, which is pretty low. It's stage 4. However, though, my kidneys are still trying to filter my blood to keep me alive. And that's something I got to give thanks for. And that's something I can meditate on as far as positivity. Even though I have this CKD journey that I'm going through and it's really hard, I got to be thankful that I have a spouse to kind of walk with me through this. And I'll be honest with you, I'm thankful to have my wife, because I don't know if anybody else could navigate this season with me the way that it's going other than my wife, even though it's hard on her too. And I always say this, it's not the person who's going through the calamity that's the main character. The main character in those situations is the caregiver. And I got to give my wife all the props, because she's seen some crazy stuff. She's seen blood on my clothes. She's seen doctors poking and prodding. She's seen me in my downest. And she stood strong. And, I got to be thankful for that. And I'm mindful of that all the time. So that's mindfulness and meditation techniques, at least from my perspective. I think the importance of self-care is another way to manage your emotional and mental portion of your CKD journey. It's important to take care of yourself. Super important. We're not just talking about putting on makeup in the mirror. Well, I don't use mascara or anything like that. The importance of taking care of yourself, like making sure you shower regularly. If you have the strength, you should have the strength to shower regularly. Taking care of yourself in the aspect of making sure you groom yourself still. Now, don't come at me because I got a beard and all that. I keep my beard fairly, groomed and stuff. But taking care of yourself, making yourself feel good, smelling good, spray a little cologne, put on a little lotion, go out in the sun, get a little sunshine on you, walk around, put on your best clothing and just kind of be amongst the people in the public, feel like a person again, because I'll be honest with you. A lot of times you don't want to just feel like a patient. You don't want to feel like somebody who's going through some kind of medical crisis. You want to feel like a human being. So a lot of times what you'll see me doing, I'll put on some shades. I'll crack open the Camry and I'll go driving around and I'll put on, shades on. I probably have some of my best clothing on, real tropical stylo, button-up shirt, or maybe just even some cool shoes on, and I'll just kind of feel good about myself. Just so that I don't feel like I'm a patient. And I'll be honest, I'm of the mindset, I don't like to wear my illness. There's a lot of times you have folks, and it's no slam on them, because a lot of times they just can't help it. But if I'm able to, I'm not going to wear my illness until I just have no choice. I'm not going to wear it because I don't want, I think this is a fault for me. I try not to look for pity parties and people to feel sorry for me, because I want to feel like I can beat this, or I'm stronger than this. I'm not going to have this ruin my life. And so I say all of that because self-care is super important. Put on some lotion, put on some cologne, put on your favorite clothes, go for a drive, go for a walk, go to a park, go to the mall. I don't even know if malls are still, booming anymore, but you know what I mean? Just do something that'll uplift you in that sense. One of the most important things is building a support network. I mentioned having family and friends around that can talk with you and lift you up in moments where you're feeling down. I was on Facebook. I had 605 friends on Facebook. I probably spoke to about 28 folks on Facebook. I deleted Facebook. You know why? Because it served no purpose for me at this point. I did migrate to Instagram because I think I was looking for a community of people, like a group of sorts that I can get plugged into and ask for advice or seek help or whatever the case may be outside of nephrology and urologists and stuff like that. But I didn't see that as much. I saw folks going through their journey, but there was no group per se. So then, after talking with a good friend of mine, shout out to Samantha Neff, after talking to a good friend of mine, she said, why don't you use your voice to kind of help you spread, what you're going through to encourage other folks? And that's exactly what I did. I actually went out and started this Facebook group called Mr. Cool Beans. And yes, it's mostly about my journey, but I use a lot of my platform to educate, to share my experiences, to encourage folks to, check their numbers, to look at their blood pressure, to make sure, their kidney function is going good, check their GFR. Why not? What's there to lose? And with that, I've met some really great folks on my Instagram platform, which continues to encourage me to build more community, to check in on people. I know a solid 6 or 7 CKD warriors, all my CKD peeps on Instagram. I met a solid amount of them. And now what I'm doing, I'm just checking in on them because I feel like once you have this diagnosis and somebody else is going through it, you almost feel like, man, this is somebody. This is almost like family now, so building a support network helps. Seeking professional help, all right? I mentioned the nephrologist. I mentioned talking to your primary care doctor. You never want to substitute talking to these folks first because they are the medical professionals. I'll even say talk with a renal dietitian if needed, because I know a lot of times CKD patients are told, or given that one sheet to follow as far as diet restrictions and stuff like that. But you might want to seek a renal dietitian who can better guide you or customize a diet plan for your specific needs. Even joining support groups, I mentioned that, and even journaling or creative expressions. Ta-da! Here's Mr. Cool Beans, the Brew podcast. All right. I decided to do this journaling, and pretty much this podcasting is pretty much like journaling. My Instagram is like the creative expressions because I like to use creative platforms to create little, Instagram posts and stuff like that. And it helps me feel like I am creating something. I'm doing something with my time instead of sitting around, waiting for the next doctor's appointment, feeling sad about myself. I'm using my time wisely. I know a good friend of mine on Instagram, Positive Bluebird. She's out here. She's creating stuff. She's making like charms and bracelets, and she's creating purses and knitting stuff. And I think she's even donating it to folks in the hospitals. I don't know. I might need to check in on her and make sure that's accurate. But shout out to Positive Bluebird, who's using her time to make sure that she's being creative and expressive in that sense. And she's a big 80s fan. All right. So I rock with that because she loves the 80s. All right. Cruel Summer. Anywho, yes, please, all of these things, mindfulness and meditation, importance of self-care, building a support group, seeking professional help, joining support groups, even journaling or creative expression are all ways or strategies for managing the mental and emotional aspects of CKD. Now, before we part, because I know I've done a lot of jibber jabber and jaw banging right now, pause. Before we part, on this episode, I would like to take the time to share some resources that could help you with navigating the mental landscape as you battle your chronic illnesses or even chronic kidney disease. Okay. But this is for folks specifically with chronic kidney disease. I know there's the National Kidney Foundation, NKF, at www.kidney.org. All right. I want you to look for the section on coping with CKD, mental health, and support groups. They often have fact sheets and articles on related topics. There's also the American Kidney Fund, the AKF, which is similar to NKF, and they also offer resources and support for people with chronic kidney disease. That's at www.kidneyfund.org. We also have the crisis text line. Okay, crisis text line. You can text home at 741-741. This is for USA, the US, Canada, or the UK. It provides free 24/7 crisis support via text messages. And this is the piece here that I want to harp on because just because we lose so many people to depression, anxiety, and fear. And folks with chronic illnesses, their levels or the percentage of them kind of increases. The percentage for them kind of coming across this form of crisis is heightened because of their condition. So please, folks, if you feel like you are down, you're depressed, you're in a funk, you're in a dark zone, please do not hesitate to reach out to someone, or even reach out to any one of these hotlines where you have professionals who are not going to judge you. I know there are times it's hard to find people to talk to because everybody's busy, everybody's in their own lane, everybody's doing their own thing. But guys, please, please, please try to find someone to talk to. Seek professional help. There's also the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. You can text 98 or dial 988. This is for U.S. citizens. It connects you to individuals. It connects individuals in crisis with trained counselors. Trained counselors. A lot of times it's not just, so some of our situations goes beyond just having a friend to talk to. Sometimes we really do need somebody who's trained in the profession who can talk us off a ledge. Please, guys, I encourage you to reach out for help if you are struggling. Okay. Matter of fact, I also want you guys to share your own experiences. I know I can't just be the only one just talking a whole bunch, sharing my experience. I want you guys to share your own experiences in the comment section or even on my social media. Reach out to me, inbox me, message me something, or even talk with your friends. You know, tell your friends about this podcast so that maybe they can share their experiences with me, and we can have a conversation, a true conversation, and have dialogue amongst each other, so that way we can encourage each other even more. I want you to remember that you're not alone. Yeah, this road, our diagnosis is our own diagnosis. Nobody shares it with us. My wife does not have CKD. My son does not have CKD. My wife and son does not have high blood pressure. My wife and son, they did not get diagnosed with kidney cancer. All that is under my name. And sometimes, yes, it can feel like you're the only one walking, and it is. You might be the only one walking through it. But I want you to know that you are not alone in this. There are millions of people who have this and have owned it and are willing to encourage each other on how they navigate it. There's medical professions who are with you on this. Like there's a couple renal dietitians, like Plant-Based Kidneys on Instagram, who I know that if I reach out to her, she'll reach back, even though I'm not her personal client yet. You know, she reaches out to me as if she's my actual sister, and I appreciate her so much for that. And she lets me know that I am not alone in this at all. And so if you feel like you're not alone, here's a reminder that I am with you in this. As far as a chronic kidney or chronic illness goes, I'm with you in this. You shouldn't face this alone, because you're not. Okay. With that being said, guys, that's my time. I want to thank you so much for tuning into this episode of the podcast. Again, I think I'm going to have this episode done in 2 parts, where I have the mental health specialist, my wife, maybe. I don't know. I got to see what she's doing. I really got to see what she's doing. I can't just barge in on her time, because, anywho, I might have her come on here, and we can talk about how we can navigate and use resources to our benefit as we battle chronic illnesses, or just in general, just talk in general. So if you haven't already, go ahead and click and follow so you can get an update on when the next episode drops. Also, I am on Instagram chronicling my journey in real time. You can follow me at Mr. Cool Beans 2889 to get connected with me in my life. I mean, I like to think I'm pretty cool. At least I try to be. At least if I'm not cool, my kidneys are cool. Hence the name Mr. Cool Beans. Kidney beans, cool beans. All right. So follow me on Instagram, Mr. Cool Beans 2889. That's MrCoolBeans 2889. Get connected with me on Instagram. Follow me here on Podbean. And ladies and gentlemen, that's it for this episode. Again, I'm glad we had a chance to connect, and I will see you on the next one. Take care, peeps. Peace.